you would have a ton of SDRs to AE ratio, et cetera. And when you wanted to scale, you used to have CROs bring in big Excel sheets of how many AEs you needed to scale and what they would bring in and how many BDRs, SDRs per AE. And there used to be this whole calculation. Then a company called Clay came along and coined this term called GTM engineer. And, then through learning through that, you could use AI tools to automate and you could basically collapse the amount of people that you had on the sales side. I do think that by 2030, you're going to have very small sales teams where AI and AI agents will handle traditional outbounding, so to speak. And then once it gets to a certain level, then you might have a human step in and maybe close the sale, etc. On the marketing side, we're starting to see the same thing. You can hire content engineers now. That's actually a term. And you can hire social media engineers, this kind of thing, that are managing a bunch of AI agents.
Welcome to the NextGen Scale podcast. I'm your host, Elena, AI consultant and architect of change. In every episode, I sit down with the founders, innovators, and leaders who are building the future, the ones who are solving the hardest problems and turning disruption into opportunity. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, this podcast is for you. Let's get into it. My guest today is Angeley Mullins, founder and CEO of Ateris Ventures, where she advises founders and CEOs build and scale their AI and go-to-market strategies. Before becoming a founder herself, she was a top commercial executive, a CMO, CCO, and CGO, scaling high-growth startups and working with big technology brands like Amazon, Intuit, and GoDaddy. She's been named by Crunchbase as one of the most influential women in sales, featured in Forbes and VentureBeat, and she's now building a community to back the next generation of female founders. Anjali, welcome to the podcast.
It's really nice to be here, Elena.
You spent many years in the C-suite. What was the moment you decided the next chapter had to be yours? For the listener who is hearing about Ateris for the first time, what do you do and who do you do it for?
Yeah, so for the listeners, I'm Angeley Mullins. I'm founder and CEO of Ateris Ventures. So it is a venture company investing in the next generation of founders. I also focus on female founders, underrepresented founders, and I'm also an operating C-level as well. I'm also the chief growth officer at Ninox, AI software platform here in Berlin. So I do both and proud to do both. What I've learned so far in my history, so this will be the eighth company that I've scaled, is that every company is different. Being nimble, moving fast is extremely important. Having a good team of mentors, leaders, operators around you, also important. Listening to your people. So lots of lessons to take away and really excited for what the future will bring.
Yes, definitely. What's usually going on in a founder's business when they realize we need to improve our go-to-market strategy and when people look for you at one point?
So it really depends at the stage that the founder is in. If they're at the very early stage, for example, pre-seed, seed, Series A, they're most likely looking for product market fit, or they've tried a few things, I'll say. Usually they get advice from their investors, from different advisors. Sometimes that advice is great, sometimes not, and they're looking to figure out what can actually stick when it comes to product market fit and how they can scale. So in that capacity, they usually bring me in to find that. If they're a little bit more advanced, let's say they're on the latter end of the Series A, or they're going, Series B, or they're trying to get, further funding rounds, usually what happens is they've found their initial product market fit, and now they need to figure out how to build what's called a scalable model. So how do you scale the same thing over and over again? And it's always that story of going from 10 million to 100, and, that hyper growth. So they bring me in for that as well. And then the third thing is, how do you increase more brand and awareness? And I would say, especially in Europe, we've had more of this product led, and product led is absolutely amazing. But sometimes founders in Europe forget that Brand is actually, and awareness is the original revenue driver, and it's something that they need to absolutely do and to execute. So that's always a fun one.
Which are the biggest blocks when it comes to sales and scaling startups that you see in founder companies?
For founder led companies, sales, usually people think it's about your product when really it's about your story. And this has been one of the hugest transitions, even in the past year to 2 years. Sales is about a belief system, it's about telling people your story and getting them to believe what you believe. It is no longer like it was 5 years ago and you just talk about your product features, and since we're in the era of AI, your product features are gonna be dead in 6 months anyway. So, it's really about that story and that belief system and that vision, and that's something that I found in Europe is that a lot of European founders don't understand how to sell, and I think a lot of founders worldwide, so it doesn't matter what market you're in, a lot of founders think that they have an idea and they have a concept and that they don't need to sell it. It'll either sell itself, which I think is one of the biggest myths, in sales and in tech, or they think that they'll just hire someone to come in for them. So this is where you get the really, I would say, textbook problem of early stage startups where a founder hires their first salesperson, and it could be a VP sales, it could even be an AE, and they expect that salesperson to find their product market fit for them. That is not how it works. As a founder, you are the original salesperson. You have to like selling because you're going to be selling to everyone and anyone who will listen. Potential customers or clients, partners, investors, if you're going the investment route, you're always selling.
And what is the role of AI in the sales process as now more marketing and sales operations get automated? Does GTM strategy matter more or less? And what does the new AI era actually looks like?
Super good question. So it's not about if GTM matters more or less. It is, does critical thinking matter more or less? Critical thinking matters much more because everyone has the same AI tools and you get what's called this AI slop. And I went to a conference last month, actually in Amsterdam, so for CMO Alliance, and there was a great marketing leader that got up and he talked all about marketing and AI slop and how do you get rid of that? And so, what is that? It's when everyone's writing the same AI generated content, and that could be in sales or marketing. How do you break through the noise? And how do you make sure that your content, your message in marketing or sales is original, really gets to the heart of the issue, really resonates with your customer or your investor, whoever you're trying to sell to? So, critical thinking matters more. Go to market will always be a thing because you need to put out your product or service to the market. So go to market will always be a serious thing, but it's whether you critically think through the process. I think that's what will differentiate winners from companies that you never heard of.
Where in the GTM funnel does AI deliver the biggest ROI and where it is overhyped?
Right now, we're dealing with, for example, data enrichment, outbound prospecting, social media. These are things where it can deliver real value. On the back end, AI workflows. So all of those GTM superstars out there that are putting together their AI tool stacks with their workflows and how do they automate? What are they automating? It's usually outbound outreach. It's usually how to get in contact with clients. Sometimes there's internal processes and systems that are automated, but AI workflows in the back end, huge uplift, completely worth the money. AI tools and systems for some marketing. And I say some because you don't want it to turn into AI slop. You want to make sure that there's some thinking behind it. That's definitely worth the money. AI, where is it not really worth it right now? I think some of the AI assistants, so not the workflows, but some of the assistants, I've actually tried some. Some are amazing, some are just not there yet as far as the product evolution. Some can be quite buggy. So it really just depends. I think you just need to make sure what you're working with. The thing about AI and AI tools is that everything is changing so fast. So think about 2025. Everything was ChatGPT, right? Everybody, that's all they could talk about was ChatGPT. We're in 2026 now. It's like ChatGPT doesn't exist and it's all Claude. right? Claude, 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 Claude everywhere. Now in 2027, what will it be? Who knows? But I think the one thing that holds true is that these tools and systems are changing so fast. So it's the same thing that's happening on the product side with product features. You can no longer depend on your product features to save you. You have to actually build a system and a story. And it's the same thing with your AI tools. Half of these companies by 2030, half of the smaller AI companies might not even exist anymore. I mean, there's a lot of us in tech that are speculating that there's going to be a huge, we call it AI apocalypse, but we basically it's the great AI consolidation, the same thing that happened in the 90s with the dot coms. There was a consolidation. So there's going to be some interesting movement over the next few years.
Yes, definitely. What do you think? Is it better for founders to focus on mastering one tool or rather to look for the trend or a new feature or something that might bring more productivity or to just stick with one tool and let's learn that first and then continue to something that might be actually better?
I always am challenged with this question because everybody wants the secret go-to-market stack. Everybody wants the secret tool. It's like master one tool, and that's your path to success. Claude right now is probably one of the best all-rounder AI tools, but just understanding Claude alone does not give you, success. Otherwise, every company would be successful right now. What I can say is understanding how to think, understanding discernment. These basic skills is what's going to separate the great founders from the ones you'll never hear about. It is not the tool. And I always tell people a AI tool is not a strategy. An AI tool is not a go to market strategy. So you have to have the critical thinking behind it. And this is the thing that I think people are forgetting. They're just grasping for, whatever they think is going to give them the quick wins.
Yeah, absolutely. So here I speak from my own experience. When writing a prompt, I sometimes spend literally half an hour. I just to craft my prompt and to include all the information. And I'm every time just amazed from the difference that makes when you put a generic prompt and when you actually put more information and context. And this leads me to the question about data. How important do you think is data in working with AI and scaling a brand or using it in the GTM strategy?
Data, of course, is extremely important, but I think data has been important 50 years ago. It's important today. It'll continue to be important. The interesting thing is nobody's really cracked this data problem. I think that's the more interesting piece. We've been talking about it for decades. We'll continue to talk about it. And it's always data from one platform or tool doesn't match the data from the other platform or tool. And people are trying to figure out what the source of truth is. These actual problems haven't changed. So I think that is the bigger insight, right? It's quite interesting that we have more advanced tools and more advanced solutions, but we still have the same data problems.
True. How does AI change inbound and outbound marketing? Is
It
there that used to work before that is not working anymore?
It fundamentally changes everything because we used to have on the sales side huge sales organizations, right? You would have a ton of SDRs to AE ratio, et cetera. And when you wanted to scale, you used to have CROs bring in big Excel sheets of how many AEs you needed to scale and what they would bring in and how many BDRs, SDRs per AE. And there used to be this whole calculation. Then a company called Clay came along and coined this term called GTM engineer, and, then through learning through that, you could use AI tools to automate and you could basically collapse the amount of people that you had on the sales side. I do think that by 2030, you're going to have very small, sales teams where AI and AI agents will handle traditional outbounding, so to speak. And then once it gets to a certain level, then you might have a human step in and maybe close the sale, etc. On the marketing side, we're starting to see the same thing. You can hire content engineers now. That's actually a term. And you can hire social media, engineers, this kind of thing that are managing a bunch of AI agents. On the marketing side, from like the design perspective, I think some designers are getting hit pretty hard. But I think, the real creative ones and design strategists, so to speak, and people that know how to set up architecture systems that do great branding, that have great creative insight, those ones will rise to the top and I think will remain. And then everyone else, I think it might be a little bit more difficult just from the design side. On the marketing side, so, we've implemented a tool called Jasper. It's an amazing tool for SEO content. There's another tool, AirOps, which is absolutely amazing, but it does not replace, again, the basis of critical thinking. Same as data, bad critical thinking in, and it comes out in the other side. So I just think that's the lesson that a lot of people are learning. And I used to show, a slide in presentations, and I used to call it, how many AI tools do you need? Right. And there would be like 50 tools. And do you really need all of them? No, you don't. And we're coming into this paradox of choice. So it's really forcing people, to understand what is actually needed.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking in percentage in the startup team, how many percent of the sales and marketing team should focus on outbound and what is the percentage for inbound?
I'm an inbound person, so I guess I am a little bit biased in my answer. There have been a lot of companies that have scaled doing 100% outbound. So outbound can definitely be useful. But I think what we're finding right now, like how scalable is outbound, at least with humans. With AI, of course, that changes the game and you can have more scalability there. Um, but I think, this will flip on over in the next few years. Again, when you have a bunch of agents that are all outbounding to each other, where's the real value? What's happening? It's still, the whole world is going to flip to a digital machine. This is what we're seeing. When you just take a step back from inbound, outbound, take a step back, from where we are, you look at the whole world. Neuralink, with Elon Musk, they're putting a chip, trying to connect your brain with a chip and trying to automate that. Cars are becoming more automated and self-driving. Advertisements and personalization is becoming much more crisp. So if you've ever noticed that you're talking to a friend on the phone or on WhatsApp and all of a sudden you get an ad on TikTok, Instagram, etc., all this stuff is happening around us. So the whole world is becoming digitized. So with that, I think this old fashioned, send out a bunch of emails that are cold. I think that even though it was a successful solution and even though it is still being done, is it what will happen in the future past 2030? I don't think so, just personally based off of what I'm seeing in the market and how everything is becoming digitized. It's going to be really people that can understand digital, people that can understand how to work digital funnels. And that usually goes more towards the inbound side. And then you will have AI agents that will do a lot of this qualifying for you. So, yeah, just wait. We're only maybe 3.5 years away from this.
Gonna be exciting.
Mhm.
What are the biggest challenges in scaling a startup from zero to their first 10 million?
Challenges, lots of making sure you have product market fit, understanding how many people you need on your team. Some of the biggest KPIs right now, it's not, CAC payback, LTV, it's nothing like that. It's actually revenue per FTE. So this is what a lot of investors look at. Nowadays, AI investors, they are looking to only invest in companies that have no more than 5 people at the pre-seed, seed, and sometimes Series A stage. So they're really looking at smaller teams that can output maximum output. We're going to start to see more and more of that. I think the first billion-dollar AI company, a company of one person, that was actually achieved. I believe it was drop shipping. Of course, it was. So You're going to see just a lot of changes in the marketplace. And there's a lot of companies now that have 10, 15, 20 people and they're doing maximum revenues. But if you start with a blank slate and you start with AI tools and systems, that's a little bit easier to do. One caveat though, you have to hire senior people. And so, for all the founders that are listening to this podcast, hiring a bunch of junior people and expecting the AI tools to pick up the slack, that is not a strategy. You have to have senior people that know what they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. What's the difference between Series A and Series B startups when it comes to GTM?
Series A startups are usually either trying to find product market fit or solidify their product market fit. They usually change their ICP and positioning 10, 20, 30 plus times. They're usually trying to figure out the right talent to come in. I see a lot of the founders and CEOs making mistakes of hiring their first or second or third or fourth, salesperson or sales leader and trying to have that person prove out product market fit. Doesn't work that way. So Series A companies, and especially if they took VC money, they're usually in this. They have a lot of pressure to produce revenue whilst still trying to prove out product market fit and scalability. I know that we're in the age of profitability now, so that's even an additional added pressure. So that's Series A. Series B companies, we hope, have the product market fit game nailed down, and then they're trying to make sure that they have that scalable model. If they just took fresh funding, usually they're hiring in some more senior leaders at this stage, and they're really trying to make sure that they can usually scale out to either different markets, verticals, etc. But this is usually the difference.
If you had to disagree with something in the marketing world, what would it be and why?
That performance marketing is your first motion. If you're in e-commerce, I have more understanding for performance marketing and I can get it and you can make that quick ROI calculation. In B2B though, maybe it's because I'm in Berlin and Berlin, started out as a performance marketing city. However, in B2B performance marketing, it's not the first line strategy. The first line strategy usually is more content, etc. The other thing that I would disagree with is I've heard a lot of founders and CEOs say, oh, brand doesn't matter. It's too fluffy. You don't get that straight ROI calculation. We shouldn't invest in it. Huge mistake. Huge. Right. And especially now in the era of AI, if you want to rank in the GPTs, I always say like LinkedIn is the second highest rated domain by LLMs before Reddit. So Reddit's number one. So if you want to rank in the GPTs, you need to get on there on LinkedIn. Content is still king, content's still valuable. So to all the founders and CEOs, stop firing your content teams. They are your unsung heroes of the situation and will continue to be so.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have a B2B background, and it's just so important to build trust and to focus on content and on educating the market and not just directly speaking out to people, but actually building the relationship.
Exactly.
That's and also now with AI and LinkedIn as one of the main business sources that AI is using. And also, I think people started developing a bit of resistance to outreach because due to AI, now everything is automated. And I think like trust is becoming more and more important, and also the story behind so that people can see, okay, this is the why here, and this is why we follow this. And I think it's a lot about trust. You're also supporting women in leadership positions, and the tech world is very male dominated. So, what is actually holding women back, and how can we break this barrier?
I used to think some years ago that it was just about bringing women to the table and opening up, the seats there and making sure that they have a voice. I mean, part of that is still true, right? But once you get to a certain level and you start to see patterns, what I'm finding is it's not just getting women to the table, but it's keeping them there. It's not just getting women to the leadership levels, it's keeping them there. And what we find is a lot of women are leaving tech. And women are leaving tech in droves. Women are leaving senior level leadership positions and they're leaving those in droves as well. Why? Because they don't feel supported. Because they don't feel like they're being taken seriously. They don't feel like they're being heard. And so these are the things. To all the men who are listening to this, we need you. We need you. It's not a women versus men or men versus women. It is us working together. We need each other, right? And I find some men are afraid and some men also struggle, right? And, men typically don't have as many support systems as women do. So women are very good at creating communities, friends groups, etc., talking to each other and supporting one another. Some men tend to be lone people, and so they don't have those same social structures. So I think that we have an issue here. And it's for men and women to come together and support one another and understand that the best teams are diverse. I know that diversity seems to be a taboo word in 2026, but I am going to say it. Diversity is a superpower. And so, diversity of gender, diversity of every other thing, it absolutely is a superpower. And I think we need to learn to support one another, respect one another, understand that we need one another. And, you cannot alienate 50% of the planet, men or women, and expect there to be any kind of progress. We have to do this together.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And we're reaching the last question. So you're a CEO featured in Forbes and major media with many leadership roles behind you. For someone walking your path and building a name, what would your advice be?
Get out there and start speaking, start writing. This is the one thing, when I started doing this many years ago, I had people ask me, why do you write? Why do you speak? Why do you get out there? Number one, it's to make sure that you have your voice and, of course, that you're using it. But building a brand, building a presence, I think people are starting to realize how important that is. And they're also realizing how difficult it is. It is not easy. It takes time. And this is why in the tech world, a lot of founders and CEOs have kind of dismissed brand. They call it too fluffy, etc. But the best companies in the world also have the biggest and most lovable brands. So I guess a spin on the word lovable for all the people that like that product as well. But it really is true. So I think that's the one thing that people are learning. And it's hilarious to me because I always say brand is the original revenue driver, really is the original one. And people are very loyal to brands. So this is the thing I think that everyone can do. Get out there, start speaking, start writing, use your voice.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that the connection to a brand is much stronger than just to receiving a message and seeing an offer that maybe would fit your business. But when it's a brand, there is also the story behind. And now there is another question that comes to my mind, something that I recently posted on LinkedIn is, and also a topic that is connected a lot to my entrepreneurial journey because every leader has a long path, and those paths goes also through moments that something is not going so well. And could you remember a moment of your journey where you thought, okay, this is not how I expected to happen, but I learned a lot from that thing?
I've gone through a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And I think it's interesting because, here in Germany, where I'm in, they have a cultural thing of you can't fail, you can't make a mistake, nothing can go wrong, right? People don't want to admit if they don't know something. I come from the States where it's the opposite. You say, okay, well, that didn't work out, and you keep going, right? Um, for me, it was understanding that every single failure brings you to a success. And the best leaders on the planet are the ones that have failed. And you look at some of the people that in tech, at least the tech idolizes them, the Elon Musks of the world, they failed at more things than they've succeeded at. And I think the best entrepreneurs understand failure. So it's not to say that you are striving for failure, but it's to say that learning from it and bouncing back quickly and understanding that it is a marathon, not a sprint. These things. And sometimes you actually get the best successes out of certain failures. So really just having a thick skin and just having a clear understanding that the journey is what defines you. So it really is true.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. And something that I like saying, and it's maybe too much, and it's not always applicable in all the cases. I also live in Berlin. And I know how important it's here that people really don't make mistakes and it's focused on precision, which is a thing I absolutely love. But at the same time, we learn a lot when we actually do our own mistakes. And in entrepreneurship, I think it's extremely important to put yourself out there and try and see what is not working because these are actually the biggest lessons.
Yeah, exactly.
Anjali, thank you very much for sharing your experience and how startups can use AI and improve their go to market strategies. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.